This is the GMBN Tech Essentials series. It's our easy to follow guide to setting up your bike and maintaining it yourself at home. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at everything to do with your gears, and that is how they work, how to get them set up, and what to do if you run into problems. Okay, so first up, let's take a look at the business end. This is where it all happens from. This is your shifter. Now on some bikes you just have a single shifter like this particular one. Other bikes you have two, one for the front derailleur and one for the rear derailleur. For the front derailleur, it will either be shifting 2 or 3 chainrings. For the rear, it's anything up to 12 sprockets. The paddle shifter found on the underneath here sits naturally where your thumb would actually sit, just below the bars, and that's responsible for shifting, click at a time or a few at a time, into a lower gear or your bigger sprockets at the back. Now the other lever will be responsible for your other shift to take you back down or into a higher or smaller gear. Now on SRAM it's designed to be used with your thumb on this side of the bars. On Shimano you can use it either with your thumb or with your finger from the other side. But fundamentally the shifters do the same thing. They have a cable spool on the inside and it's responsible for shifting those gears, and the only other adjustment that they all have is the barrel adjuster here. Now the barrel adjuster, its job is to take up slack in the cable system. Now you'll often hear the term cable stretch, and what happens is when you put the cable on the bike in the first place, it needs to sort of bed in, and as you use the gears a bit, you'll be pushing the housing into the shifter and into the stops of the frame, and all those little minute movements, even ½ millimetre at a time, all create slack in the system. This is used to counteract that and take up that slack. You also get some of this slack over time, and it has a few effects on your shifting, which we'll go into a bit later. If you want to know a bit more about the internals of shifters, fear not, we're going to be looking at how to change the whole cable system and how to take these shifters apart in order to do so in a future video. Okay, and now let's look at the front derailleur. Now unfortunately none of our presenter bikes actually have the front derailleur anymore. They've all got one by, but I know that lots of people's bikes and lots of your bikes out there will still have front derailleurs on. Now you get these in orientations to suit 2 or 3 chainrings on there. Of course one by is the king these days, and typically they mount onto the frame itself here, and there's just 2 main adjustments that you can do to the device itself. So the device is a cage essentially, and then it's got a parallelogram that enables it to follow with the 3 chainrings. On the top of it are 2 limit screws. One adjusts the limit on the inner chainring, that's the one nearer the frame, and the other one adjusts the limit on the outside chainring. The only other 2 adjustments you can make are cable tension, the same as you would with the rear derailleur, and the height of the derailleur. Now the way to set the height up initially is that when you're in the outer chainring, so your biggest chainring, there should be a gap of between 1 and 3 millimeters between the cage itself and the top of the chainring teeth. And that enables you to downshift and upshift as clean as possible, and it also maximizes on the chance of the cage itself keeping the chain on there in case of rough terrain. Now the front derailleur is a little bit different to the rear derailleur in that the rear derailleur is quite precise. So they move anything from 7 up to 12 speeds really on them, and of course it's a tiny amount they have to move each time, so it's a very precise operation. But when it comes to the derailleur on the front, if we're looking at this one, which is a triple, so there's 3 chainrings on here, the gaps between the sizes of those can be quite big, so it's quite a rough changing experience by comparison to the rear. Now the aim of the cage surrounding that chain that's moved on the parallelogram is literally to push the chain over one side at a time, depending on which way you're shifting, until it catches ramps on the back of these chainrings, which are designed to hook the chain up onto the next chainring. It depends on which design you have, but it can take as much as half of a turn of your pedals from when you operate the shifter for that to initiate, as the chain grabs and takes hold as you pedal it around. It's a little less so on the way back down. It can be a little bit more punchy, but because of this jump, it's really crucial to get those adjustments done correctly in the first place, because sometimes it might not jump down when you want it to, or other times, in the case of the small chainring or the granny ring as it's known, you actually jump too far and it will jump straight off and onto the bottom bracket shell, and on some bikes it can become jammed in there, but more than anything it's just an inconvenience. It's not actually changing correctly. And now let's move down to the back of the bike where you find the rear derailleur. Now this essentially is a parallelogram design, and it's on a pivot and it has a sprung lower cage there. On the lower cage you see 2 guide wheels, also known as jockey wheels. The top one the job is simply to make sure the chain stays in line with those sprockets, and the bottom one is simply there to take up the slack in the chain according to which gear you're in. Now, although there's different models on the market by various different brands, fundamentally they work on the same principle and they will all have the same adjustments you need to make to set them up. Now let's just take a look in a bit of detail and I'll explain to you what each of the adjustments does and why it's so important to make sure that yours is set up correctly. So on every rear mech, you'll have upper and lower limit screws. Now these are based either on the back or on the side of the mech. Now depending if you've got SRAM or Shimano, you're going to need either a Phillips or a crosshead style screwdriver or a 3mm Allen key. Now, for example, the lower gearing or the bigger sprocket you will see at the back. When I make an adjustment to that, if I get this adjustment wrong, when I shift the gears, the chain can actually hop over the top and into the spokes. One of a few things can happen. So A, you can damage your spokes or even snap the spokes. B, the chain all gets wrapped up and it can snap your rear derailleur off, or worse, it could snap the derailleur and the hanger, so it can be very costly. So that's why it's absolutely vital to get these adjusted correctly. Now quite often you'll find they are marked low and high, L and H. And of course the high gear being the smallest, the low gear being the biggest. Now if the ones on your particular derailleur are not marked, you will usually find they're actually the opposite to what you think corresponds. So for example, I'm currently in my high gear or my smallest gear at the back here, and you would think because there's the two screws here on the back that the one on the right would adjust it. It's actually the one on the left. You can test this out just by simply looking down the line of the derailleur and making some subtle adjustments to that screw whilst keeping your eye on that upper guide wheel. What you're looking for is the upper guide wheel in relation to that small sprocket. And now it's out of alignment, so if I was to pedal the gears now, it would sound quite noisy and actually will try and change gear by itself. What you're looking for with your upper and lower limit screws is for the chain to be completely in line with the guide wheel at that point. The next adjustment you will see on all derailleurs is the B tension or the B screw. Now this is directly responsible for adjusting the height or the gap between the upper jockey wheel and the bottom of the biggest sprocket. Why do you need to do that? Well, the reason for that is, of course, there's different size cassettes with different size sprockets on the market, so the derailleurs have to be adjusted to actually work smoothly with that. And of course, there's different ratios of cassette. Sometimes shifting will be very smooth across the board, and other times there'll be quite a spike up to that biggest gear. So it's important to get that B screw adjusted correctly with the correct gap. Otherwise, either A, makes it quite difficult to change into that really big gear, and you'll find that the guide wheel will foul on it and the whole derailleur will bounce up and down. Or the other way is you simply won't ever get into it, and if you do, it makes it very hard because it won't be able to drop back down again afterwards. So another reason to make sure that that is accurately adjusted. And the final adjustment that you get on all derailleurs is, of course, the cable tension there. Now, it's pointless trying to adjust that until you have your other limits set. If you get those inner and outer or upper and lower limits set and you get your B screw set, then is the time to adjust the cable tension. Now, the whole idea is you pull the cable taut but not tight. You don't want to be actually shifting the derailleur just by pulling that cable hard, because of course that is the job that the shifter does. You just want to nip it up, and then depending on which bolt it has on your particular one, on the SRAMs sometimes you get a 4, sometimes you get a 5, sometimes you get a T25, and it does vary on different derailleurs from different years. So you just have to check that yourself there, but make sure you use the correct tool, of course, because you don't want to round out that bolt on there that pinches the cable. The other thing, of course, is just to make sure that the cable does line up and follow the correct route. On some designs of derailleur, it can be possible for the cable just to pop out of its groove, and if that's happening, you'll never get clean shifting. Now, the final thing you're likely to see on most modern derailleurs is a clutch mechanism. Now, it differs slightly on SRAM and Shimano. Now, the reason Shimano offer you the opportunity to turn the clutch off is simply for ease of removing the rear wheel. If you have the clutch on and you try and remove the rear wheel, you're fighting that mechanism in order to loosen off the chain so you can drop the wheel out. That's all it is. On SRAM derailleurs, you can't adjust it. The clutch is housed in the same part. It's a non-adjustable part as standard. But SRAM has a very cool get around for this. They've got a cage lock. So you would simply move the lower cage all the way forwards, press that cage lock button, and actually holds it in that slack position, so the derailleur is not actually holding any tension on the chain. Makes it very easy to drop the wheel out. However, it's very easy to injure yourself accidentally if you get your fingers trapped in here, because it's a very powerful cage, as I'll demonstrate when I let go. So once adjusted in the first place, your front mech will barely ever give you any trouble, because it just gets on and does its job. It works under quite a lot of tension. It doesn't have to do too much. However, there are a few little problems you're going to run into with front derailleurs over the time of having one. So let's have a look at those and how you get around those problems. Now, the first you might encounter would be the tyre rubbing on the front derailleur itself. Now, this will only ever happen if you're on a granny ring, so the small chain ring there, doing an extremely tough climb, really. So the chain will be incredibly close to your tyre, and also the mech will be close to the tyre as well. So firstly, there's a few things that are not anything to do with the derailleur that can be the cause of this. So one of them can be frame flex. So some frames have flex, and you'll never notice this really on the 1x system, but it becomes exposed when you have items like the front derailleur that are very close to that tyre. Likewise, it could be wheel flex. So wheel flex is far more likely than frame flex, and you're going to see it in somewhere like this. Now, at the same time, your wheel might be out of true, so the wheel might be slightly buckled, and of course your tyre might not be seated, or it might have delaminated itself as well, in which case the tyre might have a bulge in the casing or something like that that is causing the problem. Now, the adjustments to get around this, whatever the reason, is basically using your limit screw on the inside there. But beware that if you adjust that limit screw too much, your shifting down into that little chainring might suffer slightly. So double check first that your entire mech lines up with the chain. So put your bike in a middle sort of gearing, and what you want is to make sure that the mech itself in that position is dead straight. So it's completely aligned, both sides of the cage are running parallel with that chain. And as I explained, there's really only the one adjustment you can do to that on the actual derailleur. If it is rubbing because of the wheel wobbling around, or there's some potential damage there, then that's something you might want to address and take it to the bike shop and get those guys to have a look at. The next up is a classic, and this will always happen to you if you have 3 chain rings. And that will be the chain rubbing on the outer cage when you're in the middle chainring and in the smallest sprocket at the rear. Now, the middle chainring is the one that you will use the most. It's the one you will wear out first. It's the one that you'll do the majority of your riding in. Only using the granny when you need those real extra sort of low gears for the steeps. And likewise, when you're spinning out your gears, you'll be using that big chainring. So the bread and butter is that middle ring. Now, you can make limit adjustments on the outer chainring and on the inner chainring by using your limit screws. But the way to adjust the cage itself on the middle chainring is with the barrel adjuster. So the barrel adjuster really only makes a difference on the front derailleur in the middle chainring. That's what it's for in this case. So as you can see here, the chain is rubbing just on that outward corner here of that cage. Makes a bit of an annoying noise, and that's about it really. So all it will take is a few turns counterclockwise on that barrel adjuster on the shifter, and that alleviates the problem. And the final problem, which is definitely down to the fact that your limit screws are not adjusted properly, is under or over shifting. Now, under shifting would mean when you're shifting down into the smallest chainring, it jumps straight off and onto the bottom bracket shell, or worse, it gets caught down there somewhere. That's a case of just aligning the derailleur over the inner chainring. But the outer one can cause other issues as well, because the chain will come off completely and it can get wedged between the outer chainring and the crank. And if that happens, you need to know that that's something happening straight away, because if you continue to pedal, you're going to snap your chain, potentially pull off your rear derailleur. It's a bit of a nasty thing to happen. So you need to make sure with your chain shifted into that outer chainring, you then adjust the outer screw there just to adjust the limits on it and make sure it's centered. Simple as that. Make your adjustment there, and then hopefully your shifting will be perfect. Now, like the front mech, the rear mech works very well once it's been set up in the first place. However, because there's a lot more adjustments to be made on the rear mech, and the sensitivity of them, and the fact that it's also in the firing line for rocks and other stuff, it's no surprise that here and there you are going to have some shifting problems. Now, here's a bunch of the very common ones you're likely to come across in your time riding a bike, and this is what you need to do about them. Now, the gear system is actually fairly simple once you have set all your limit screws and all the adjustment of your mechs up. Now, of course, gears work on an indexing system, and that refers to one click at the shifter corresponding to one gear change at the rear end here. Now, one of the most common things to happen is you make that single gear click change at the shifter and it doesn't correspond at this end, so there's a bit of a delay. Now, the simple reason that doesn't happen, provided everything's set up correctly in the first place, will be cable tension, which means there's not enough tension for the mech to move at the same rate as the cable you're pulling from that shifter. So all you need to do to cure this and get it to hop up that one gear that you need is get on that barrel adjuster and turn it counterclockwise or anti-clockwise until, whilst pedaling of course, until that actually shifts up one gear. Now what you want to do is get this sorted on the first 2 or 3 sprockets here and make sure it shifts up and down. If it's not shifting back down again, you've put too much tension on, so take some of it off by screwing it back in clockwise on that barrel adjuster until it shifts smoothly between those first 2 or 3 sprockets. There's no need to do the rest because the spacing is exactly the same, and provided your limit screws have been set correctly in the first place, your gears will be indexed and they'll work. Now the next problem is basically the opposite of that first problem and not shifting into that smaller sprocket. Now there's actually a few reasons this can happen. Now the first and normally the most obvious one is that your limit screws have not been adjusted quite right. Now you can adjust them and your gears will work, but it's how well you fine tune them. And in particular with the smaller sprocket, because basically there's less tension on the derailleur. When you're shifting into the bigger sprockets, it's under tension, so the accuracy is basically will take care of itself. But when it's just down to losing that cable tension, it's got to be adjusted correctly for it to drop into that smallest position there. So even if it's like quarter of a turn out, it won't shift correctly. So check that first, make sure it lines up, and make sure when you cycle your bike through the gears there, you can even try this by pedaling backwards. There shouldn't be any clicking or anything. It should be like just nice and smooth. The only noise you will hear will be like the cassette freewheeling and all that sort of stuff. So just pay attention to that. The next up is you've basically got too much cable tension, so it's just not allowing it to drop back down into that smaller sprocket there, in which case the option there is to remove some of that cable tension by screwing it in clockwise. It might only need quarter or half a turn on the barrel adjuster on your shifter, but that should hopefully take care of it. The final option, which is something that happens when you've been riding your bike for a little while and perhaps you've not been maintaining it as much as you should have done, is that the cable is actually sticking inside the housing. Now if that's happening, basically there's a good chance it won't ever drop back down because the cable is sticking, it's not allowing it to. If that's the case and it's happening to your bike, fear not, we are making a dedicated video on how to change, flush out, put a new inner cable in and how to set it back up again. So that one is coming very soon on GMBN Tech. So the next one is something that's actually plagued myself in the past on some bikes, and of course I know that Blake's done this several times. So picture this, you're out on the trail, you go up a nice steep section, you grab a handful of nice low gears, getting ready to tackle and knuckle in there, and your chain goes all the way over the top into the spokes and it all gets mangled up. And of course the only way to do anything about it is to stop pedaling and grab a handful of brakes so it doesn't continue pulling everything around. Now that is a really, really expensive problem to have, because not only does it damage spokes, it can damage your derailleur, snap your chain, snap the hanger, and in some cases even bend parts of your frame if you've got a very lightweight frame. So to get around this, you absolutely have to make sure your upper limit screw, the one that controls the derailleur on the upper sprocket there, is crucially adjusted. Now just make sure you do pay attention to that, because on some wheel designs the spokes will be closer to the cassette than others, and of course if they're closer to the cassette it means they're closer to your rear derailleur, in particular the top of the cage by the upper guide wheel. And if you've only got a couple of millimeters to play with, common sense dictates that you've not got much room for error there, so just make sure that's always adjusted correctly and it won't cost you any money. And the final problem you're likely to have is one that makes you scratch your head really. So your limit screws are adjusted correctly, the cable tension is correct, your B screw is adjusted correctly, everything should be working right. But somehow your gears are a little bit erratic, nothing's quite right, but you can't place what it is. Now that basically tells me that something is loose on your bike. Now of course, everything is subject to vibration on a mountain bike, and the common things that can rattle loose on derailleurs are the jockey wheel bolts. There's 2 bolts there. In this case, they're 3mm Allen key heads on there, and the actual main hanger bolt that attaches it to the frame. If that's unwound itself even like an eighth of a turn, that's enough to just take all of the spacing out and your gears will never shift correctly. And I've seen people before that have had this bolt a tiny bit loose and they endlessly play with their limit screws to try and compensate, not realizing that this is loose, and they mess up all their shifting. So just be sure to check those bolts. And actually the same goes for all of your bike. Just be on top of that. Every now and then, periodically, get an Allen key, run around the bike, make sure all of the obvious bolts are tight, there's nothing loose. Gives you the good opportunity just to look after your investment. So there we go, like I said, nothing to be afraid of. Your front and rear derailleurs are very simple things, as long as you know what the adjustments do. All based on those initial adjustments and then just cable tension. So hopefully you're going to be able to cure any small issues you might have with yours at home. For the rest of our essentials videos, click over here. So there's loads of videos there already, and we're going to be making loads more. If there's any particular essentials videos you want us to tackle for you to help you work on your bikes, let us know in those comments below. And of course, make sure you subscribe and give us a thumbs up.